In the mystical tapestry of a world where ancient magic and modernity blend seamlessly, Moonlit Redemption, the Legacy of Gabriel Blackwood, chronicles a captivating tale of love, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds that transcend the divide between man and beast. Gabriel Blackwood, a brooding werewolf haunted by a generations-old curse, finds his fate intricately intertwined with Sophia, a woman who holds the key to his salvation and the power to unlock his humanity. Gabriel, tormented by the dual existence forced upon him, prowls the shadows of his existence, his every move a testament to the struggle between his primal instincts and the lingering remnants of his humanity. Sophia, unwittingly drawn into Gabriel's world, becomes the unexpected catalyst for his journey towards redemption, her courage and resilience, awakening a dormant hope within him. Together, they navigate the treacherous path set by the immortal beings who govern their destinies, from the Earth Mother Danu's cryptic guidance to the manipulations of the portal master, Sterling. Along the way they encounter a cast of enigmatic characters, including the wise and enigmatic Hannah, who guards secrets of the past, and the mischievous Mona, whose actions blur the line between ally and adversary. Moonlit Redemption weaves a rich tapestry of intrigue, where the search for a mythical potion to break Gabriel's curse becomes a metaphor for the universal quest for self-acceptance and the power of love to transform. As Sophia grapples with her newfound role in the world of werewolves and her complex feelings for Gabriel, she must confront her own fears and desires, ultimately deciding whether to embrace a destiny intertwined with his or risk losing him forever. This novel explores the depths of sacrifice, the blurred lines between good and evil, and the redemptive power of love that transcends even the most potent of curses. With its atmospheric settings, ranging from the cozy intimacy of a lakeside cabin to the grandeur of the Silver Lake Lodge, Moonlit Redemption takes readers on a journey through the heart of the werewolf realm, where the struggle for identity and the yearning for a place to call home resonate deeply. In the end, Gabriel and Sophia's tale serves as a poignant reminder that love, in its purest form, can bridge the gap between worlds and heal the deepest wounds. Moonlit Redemption, the Legacy of Gabriel Blackwood, is a testament to the enduring belief that even in the darkest of nights, love shines like a beacon, guiding lost souls towards redemption and the promise of a shared future. Chapter 1. Madison. Immaculate, orderly, predictable, I liked my lab the way I liked my men. Or at least that was the dream. In reality, my dating life was non-existent, and a loathsome brown bear had completely wrecked the tranquility I worked so hard to maintain in my lab. After 2 minutes of sharing my space with Neil, I was more than ready to see him leave. After being forced to tolerate the obnoxious slob for 2 weeks, my patience was worn so thin it was transparent. Neil was big, rough, and took up too much space. He disrespected the system I kept in my lab by leaving equipment out long after he was finished using it. He piled beakers in the sink without cleaning them. He left crumbs from his lunch on the floor and countertops. I wished he'd return to his own lab in Tribunal Facility 6, halfway across the country, or just leave anywhere but here would be flippin' fantastic. But we were no closer to figuring out the purpose of this relic than we were when we'd started, and we were tasked to work together until we had a definitive answer. All the tests show it's not hazardous. Neil opened the containment box. I, not wanting to risk my face melting off, backed the heck up. Scared. His expression contorted in a wicked grin, like he actually enjoyed my discomfort. We don't know that it's safe. We have no idea what the stone is capable of. Hand on the door, I kept my gaze locked on the clear box. Inside the gray stone did appear unassuming. It was unusually flat and had perfectly round edges. We hadn't been able to translate the runes on the surface or determine which elements composed the stone. It didn't belong on the periodic table, that was for sure, and it definitely shouldn't come out of its box. If it was harmful, we'd have seen some sort of effect on Jerry. Neil shook his head at me. Jerry's a rat. Not the same as. Neil put on a glove and hovered his hand over the top of the containment box. I had to get out of here. I turned the handle and rushed out, shutting the door behind me. Neil shot me a disapproving glare through the glass wall. Pussy. His grumbled insult carried through the speaker. Practical and non-suicidal were more apt, but he could think what he wanted. He reached his hand in, and his rubber glove made contact. I flinched. You're not even going to watch? He asked. I looked up at him. He held the stone in his hand, only the thin layer of rubber between his skin and the object. So far, no explosions, no melting, no screaming. Nothing. Come back in. Neil approached the glass. It's harmless. and you're missing out on all kinds of data you could be collecting. I can record your stupidity from here. Thank you very much. I crossed my arms. Suit yourself. He rolled the stone back and forth between his hands and traced the engraving with his thumb. Sometimes you have to get in there and take a risk. One of us has to do it or we'll both be stuck with each other forever. I don't know about you, but give me excitement. Hell, give me garbage dump. I wish I was anywhere but stuck here with you. Neil disappeared. I blinked hard. I was staring right at his stupid face when he'd spoken, but he was just gone. Poof. Neil. I looked through the glass all around the room. This had to be some kind of trick, right? He was hiding down on the... And nope. He wasn't on the floor. Also, he hadn't exploded, so that was something better than the last relic I had identified. But there on the white tile was the round gray disc. Maybe it was a vaporizer of some sort. Or even a teleportation device. No. That should have activated on contact with Jerry the rat. Could it be bear shifter specific? I come across stranger things, a rod of invisibility, ring that could force a shift, a universal language translator that only worked when held by a wolf shifter. The list of oddities that went through my lab was vast. Whatever had happened to Neil, I couldn't focus on him. My first priority had to be returning the artifact to its box. I headed down the hall to the supply room and retrieved a grabber, the remote controlled machine Neil should have been using to pick up the stone in the first place. It was a bulky box of a robot with tank-like treads and a long, tentacle arm on top. I just returned the stone to the safety of its magic-proof container, deposited into storage, and then I could figure out what had happened to that jerk Neil. Was it wrong to think of him negatively now that he was invisible, teleported away, or even dead? No, the possibilities didn't make him less of a jerk. But no matter how much I didn't care for him as a person, I still hoped he wasn't dead. The grabber was an extension of myself, and the robot arm gently, tentatively lifted the stone from the floor. The grabber didn't vaporize, so being held by a living being could be required for activation. Or not. There was no obvious cause for the activation that had led Neil to disappear. Could have been random occurrence, a timer of sorts, or some other possibility I hadn't yet determined. Whatever the reason, the stone had activated before, it wasn't doing the same now. So far so good. I pressed forward on the remote and the grabber moved to the case. I directed the claw down until it hovered just above the bottom of the case, then eased the metal fingers open. When nothing happened, I fully released the stone and moved the grabber away. Success. Feeling confident my lab was once again safe, I opened the door and stepped inside. As the door clicked shut, a thought crossed through my head. What if Neil was invisible? Invisibility seemed unlikely, given he hadn't responded to me when I'd said his name. It was possible he wasn't able to speak, but this was Neil, so it was also possible that he was just waiting for me to step inside so he could pull my hair, thinking it was some kind of hilarious game. Invisibility was definitely still on the table. Hyper aware of my surroundings, I listened for any sign that I wasn't alone. There was nothing, only the silence I'd been waiting for since I'd been forced to share my lab. There was no scent of bear. Neil really was gone. I let out the breath I'd been holding. I wished it had been under different circumstances. The weight that lifted from his absence was replaced by a new weight, my duty to try to determine what had happened to him. It was possible he was still alive, and if he was, I'd find him. An alarm sounded in the distance. It wasn't the contamination or contagion alarm, and if it had originated on this floor, the sound would be a heck of a lot louder. Was it possible it was coming from the surface? That was unlikely. Given this was a tribunal facility, the security here made Fort Knox look like a joke. The alarm was probably a training drill. Nothing to worry about. Unless, what if it was related to whatever happened to Neil? I labeled the stone's containment box with a red sticker and deposited it into the delivery tube. The suction sound of whooshing air accompanied the case to the magical storage level. Red objects were classified as too dangerous for study and quarantined. With that out of the way, I was free to go up and find out what was going on, make sure it had nothing to do with my lab. A few steps down the hall, and the elevator opened. 2 soldiers were dragging a man between them. His wrists were bound and his shoulder hung awkwardly like it was dislocated. I stopped and stared. He was big, burly, and way too muscular. His face was scruffy, his lips split, his face bruised, and dirt clung to his jeans and t-shirt like he'd been wrestling in mud. When he lifted his head, he met my gaze with a set of stunning emerald eyes. My heart fluttered like I was a silly teenage girl who had just got asked to the prom. He was filthy and didn't belong here. He was not my type, not even a little. He was trouble. I hated trouble. Whatever was happening had nothing to do with me. He had nothing to do with me. So why was I frozen in place, unable to walk away? Chapter 2. Tate. Clawing for freedom, my inner wolf teemed just beneath the surface. But I couldn't fucking shift. The metal cuffs clamped around my wrists trapped me in human form. I should have been paying attention to my surroundings. I should have thought twice about where the hell I was before I'd scaled the outer wall, just like I should have scented the grizzly. Regret was dangerous. It was all too easy to linger on mistakes of the past, wondering what could have been different if I hadn't gone out for a run. If I'd been home to defend Kyle, if I hadn't been so fucking careless, would my only friend still be alive? The grizzly shifter shoved me down into a chair, pressing on my dislocated shoulder. It hurt like hell, which was exactly why he'd done it. The conference room setting was a bit of a surprise. I'd expected a 6-foot hole. If I hadn't been hellbent on tearing the shit out of the fox-like creature who'd murdered my friend, I would have noticed it had led me onto the grounds of a tribunal facility. Fucking ifs. Now I was somewhere beneath the ground in the middle of nowhere, never to be heard from again. A shifter couldn't just stumble across a secret tribunal facility and walk away to tell the tale. But the soldiers standing over me were the least of my worries, and I was the least of theirs. Trespassing on tribunal territory is a serious offense. The grizzly sneered. Now that we're all nice and cozy, you're going to tell us your name. We'd already done this song and dance when he tackled me to the ground, threw on the cuffs and beat the shit out of me with his wolf buddy, Denton, at his side. I'd caught the wolf's name outside, but not the grizzlies. They hadn't liked my story the first time, so I didn't see the point of repeating. They wouldn't believe me about the fox creature until it started wreaking havoc. And it would. Monsters never stop being monsters. I said name, asshole. The grizzly slammed his hands down on the desk, then looked up at the corner of the room. Make it clear for the camera. Tate Graves. Just like I told you outside. What are you trying to steal? How many of you are there? Denton asked. Bullshit questions I'd already answered. I told them I was alone, hunting a creature that murdered my kin. They believed my account until the alarm went off, until there was a breach in security that wasn't me. I asked you a question, asshole. I didn't see Denton's jab coming, but I sure as hell felt the impact on the side of my jaw. The handle of the door jiggled but didn't open. The woman from the hall banged on the glass wall and yelled into a comm that made it sound like she was in the room with us. Hey, leave him alone. Her petite frame was dwarfed by her oversized lab coat. She had raven black hair and wide copper eyes, and a quality I couldn't quite put my finger on. Didn't know why she cared, but she looked at me like she knew me, like we'd spent another life together that only she remembered. And when I looked at her, I wanted to remember that life. How many of you are there? What are you after? The bear stepped into my line of sight, his nostrils flaring like the bastard might just breathe fire. I already told you, I followed the monster that killed a member of my pack. You expect me to believe you followed someone here? That you just happened upon a tribunal facility? I met his icy gaze. I don't care what you believe. The grizzly moved so quickly I thought he was going to hit me again, but the impact never came. Instead, he bent down close. You think you're tough? We'll find your friends. And none of you will leave this building alive. More threats that didn't change a damn thing. Being shifters, they should have sensed the truth in my words. Apparently, the truth wasn't enough. But it was all I had. We've got to get back up there, Hitchens, Denton said. He's not going anywhere. The grizzly, Hitchens, stared at me a few moments longer, then nodded. Both guards left the room, but Hitchens turned back before closing the door. Shut. Talk now, talk later, don't talk at all. It doesn't matter. You won't leave this place. No shit. It was unlikely any of us would. I looked past the soldiers to the woman in the lab coat. Be careful out there. The one I'm hunting will be hunting you. She took a step back from the glass and her concerned expression changed to uncertainty. I'd scared her good. Fear might just save her life. Chapter 3. Madison. It was pitch black when I woke, which was no surprise given my quarters were 2 stories underground. But I was still groggy and my alarm wasn't going off. My internal clock was excellent. I always woke 2 minutes before the first beep of the alarm. It wasn't time to wake up though. Something else had woken me. I sat halfway up and the room spun, my brain still cloudy. The clock read 3:47. Why was I awake? There was a clattering vibration on the floor. I looked down and found my phone. It must have danced itself off the nightstand. But who would call me at this hour? A lick of fear struck me. What if it was my constable? What if it was a family emergency? I grabbed the phone and checked the number. Neil. I'd spent the afternoon and evening searching for him. Was this whole thing a game to him? Had he had his phone with him this whole time? Or had someone else found his phone? I answered the call. Hello. Were you sleeping? Really was Neil. He was alive. I glanced at the door to the hall and to my closet, expecting him to pop out of nowhere proclaiming his victory and pulling off the ultimate prank. It's 3 a.m, I said. I lost time. Strange. Where are you? I tried to call. I searched everywhere. I'm at the dump. A dump? What? I must have misheard him. And this was seeming less and less like a trick with every moment that passed. Some trash heap. Mountains and mountains of garbage. The stone. It's a teleportation device. I didn't hear a lie in his words. I should have heard it if there was one of the benefits of being a shifter. But even if he was teleported to the dump, there wasn't conclusive evidence that was the purpose of the stone. Not going to say anything? He asked. Jealous you didn't have the balls to give it a go yourself? It's nothing to be ashamed of. No one has balls like mine. I rolled my eyes and flopped my head back down on my pillow. We'll need to perform more tests, I said. Make your way back. Yeah. I'll be there, but first I don't know how far I've traveled yet. It's just miles of trash in every direction. Don't wait up for me. Sweet cheeks. Bleck. I appreciate the call. Best of luck in your predicament. I hung up before I had to hear him say another word. Teleportation was interesting and I looked forward to further study. But who knew where Neil ended up? He could be halfway across the globe, and it would take time for the paperwork to go through to reacquire the stone from storage. Once an object was marked red, it wasn't easy to get it out. I took my time showering and getting dressed, then did some reading to pass the time while I waited for breakfast. My room was stocked only with foods that had a long shelf life so I could minimize the number of trips I needed to take to the surface. Technically, this area of the facility was intended as temporary quarters for the scientists during lockdowns. We'd never actually had a lockdown during the 6 years I'd been working here, but I'd moved in a little over a year ago for convenience. It made better sense not to have to commute when all of my time was spent on work anyway. Perhaps it was my raven nature holing up in one place away from the rest of the world like my constable did back home. Only, they never left and I did. I liked uncovering mysteries, exploring the nature of our world in the safety of my lab, of course. But back home there were no mysteries beyond whose turn it was to wash the dishes. It could be lonely here at times, never connecting with those around me. It was my own fault, really. I didn't try. It was easier not to let people in, especially men. And even if I did meet one, we couldn't start a family. Genetic luck of the draw, I couldn't have kids. I was meant to be alone, so that was how I lived. It was for the best, living for my passion, focusing on finding answers. It was the life I wanted. But I didn't feel content. I felt agitated. Took me a while to figure out why. It wasn't that Neil had woken me, or that yesterday had been such a strange day with the alarm going off, or even Neil's disappearance. It was the prisoner, Tate Graves. I headed into the lounge and scanned the breakfast spread before settling on my usual water, fruit, and muffin. Others were there chatting as they always did. I recognized the group in the corner from zoology, though I only knew one of their names. Charlotte and I had collaborated on one of the relics that had passed through my lab. When she smiled at me, I smiled back. Food in hand, I left the lounge and headed toward my lab. Halfway down the hall, I felt the weight of someone's gaze. I turned and saw Tate Graves watching me. He was exactly where I'd seen him last, sitting in his chair, handcuffed. Had he been left there all night? I guess he must have. At least his injuries seemed to have healed. But if he hadn't been given a bed, what were the chances he'd been fed? I found my feet moving in the wrong direction. I was supposed to go to my lab, do my work, keep my head down. But I was drawn to his door. There was a darkness to him from the way he sat, leaned forward with elbows on his knees, to the sharpness of his gaze. He looked somehow at ease and ready to strike, at the same time a predator watching his prey. Me, I wasn't afraid, even if I should have been. Instead, a shot of lust settled between my thighs. He was not my type. He was trouble. I hated trouble. My cheeks heated, but I didn't turn away. I knew the door would be locked and it wouldn't be smart to open it if I could. So I went to the slot meant for passing papers through. It was too short to fit the muffin or the orange, so I split the fruit in half and squished the muffin down before pushing the tray through the hole. Graves just stared at me with those olive green eyes. They were wild and mysterious, a jungle beckoning me to get lost in the depths. His expression was hard and unreadable, and I couldn't seem to turn away. Breaking into a tribunal facility. No one was supposed to be able to find this place. Before yesterday, no one ever had. The soldiers assumed this was an attempted heist. Their theory made sense, but I didn't believe that was true. When I looked at Tate, something about him made me feel like I could trust him. It wasn't just that I knew for a fact that he hadn't lied to the soldiers about following a murderer here. There were ways to deceive without waving any shifter red flags. But he wasn't trying to deceive anyone. I was sure of it, even if I didn't know why. I forced my gaze from him and turned to go. Thank you. His voice was deep and rough and made my breath catch. My voice came out as little more than a whisper. You're welcome. An alarm sounded, the lights flashing red. Flashing red meant non-essential personnel were to report to emergency quarters. Whatever was happening, it was bad. Really bad. Doctors and lab techs ran through the hall, while soldiers headed for the elevators. Don't go upstairs. Tate's voice was stern behind me. I turned around and found him standing by the glass. I wasn't going to. I stepped closer, knowing I wasn't supposed to. Shouldn't listen to him. I should return to the emergency quarters, to my room, where I stayed full-time. But I couldn't help my curiosity. What did he know? Curiosity killed the cat, even with its sharp fangs and sharper claws. Would it do to a bird like me? I shook the thought, and against my better judgment I stayed. The glass was strong enough to hold, even if he meant me harm. I didn't believe he did. For as imposing as he was, my gut said that I could trust him. Stupid gut. All it ever told me was to be careful not to trust anyone and not to eat the egg salad in the cafeteria. But my inner danger alarm had apparently gone haywire. I wanted to trust this giant, this intruder, this dead man. If the one Tate had followed here was inside the facility, Tate would be blamed, even if it wasn't his fault. Part of me wanted to let him out of that room, give him a fighting chance against the soldiers. But that was crazy. He was too big, too muscular, but that was my brain talking. My girl parts said, "Gimme. Don't trust anyone," he said. Why would he say that? I hadn't trusted anyone but myself since I'd left the constable. But that wasn't the point. It felt like he was warning me to stay away from him, like he knew the effect he had on me. It could be anywhere. And it's dangerous. He put his hand on the glass and I found myself drawn to mirror the motion. I laced my fingers together instead. I'll be careful. I started down the hall, back the way I had come. The elevator doors opened and a bloody mess burst through. 2 soldiers were trying to carry a third. Bandages poorly covered the third soldier's midsection. His heartbeat was fading by the second, his life slipping away. One of the soldiers pushed a string of keys on the elevator control pad. "Lock down," he said. They rushed through the hall, trying to carry the injured man between them and simultaneously trying to stop the bleeding. The scent of copper was heavy in the air, and I flattened myself against the wall, holding my breath as they passed. Why wasn't he shifting? He'd heal faster if he shifted. Heck, he'd give himself a fighting chance. "You a doctor?" One of the soldiers looked at me. I shook my head no. I was a doctor, but not the medical variety. The other man looked at me too. "Lab coat, you're going to have to do. Medical's been sealed off. Every floor is isolated from the others." They lowered the dying soldier to the floor. A rush swirled through my head, leaving me dizzy. I knelt down, pulse racing. I didn't know what they expected me to do. What happened? I asked. Smith came out of nowhere and turned on Chavez. Turned on him. Threw him to the ground and did. He pulled back the cloth. This. I choked back the bile that filled my throat. His insides were a shredded mess. When I tried to speak, my voice shook. Tell him to shift. You think we didn't try that? So him the fuck up, lab coat. I nodded and rose from my feet, trying not to breathe through my mouth. Yeah. I turned and headed back toward my lab, my head swimming. I need supplies. I'd never sewn anything in my life. I didn't own a needle and thread. What was I going to do? I'd get the emergency medical kit in my lab and then I'd give it to them, and then my thoughts and pulse were racing, the magical words that would allow me to shift on the tip of my tongue. Fight or flight, I choose flight every single time. But there was nowhere to fly. I rifled through the bandages in the metal box. There was nothing useful. And then it hit me, the ring. I ran for the lab, 2 down from mine, and scoured through their drawers until I found what I was looking for. On the surface, it was an unassuming silver band. But the force ring packed a big punch. Could force a shift. I ran back into the hall and returned to the soldiers. I sucked in a deep breath and slid the ring on the dying man's finger. His body transformed from human to panther, the ring becoming a band on his furry leg. One of the soldiers slapped my shoulder. I winced at both the contact and the force of it. You did it, he said. The panther's skin knitted itself together, closing the wound. I guess I did. Save him. I couldn't believe it. You better get to quarters, lab coat. There's something out there, something that made Smith go mad and do this. I nodded and rose to my feet, slowly walking away. What could cause someone to do something like this? If it was a contagion, this floor could already be infected. Tate's words repeated in my head that it could be anywhere. Chapter 4. Tate. Who was she? I'd been left to rot. But the raven-haired woman had offered me food when no one else had acknowledged my existence. She'd saved a soldier's life. And the wolf inside of me stirred every time she was near. I knew nothing about her, not what type of shifter she was, not even her name. And still, there was something beyond self-preservation that drew me to her. She was beautiful, no question, but it was something else. Long after she'd walked away, I found myself watching, waiting for her return. We have to move him, one of the soldiers said to the other. We can't just leave Chavez lying in the middle of the hall. The other soldier raked his fingers through his hair. He should be up by now. We can't just sit around waiting forever. We need a makeshift medbay take over one of the labs. What's the rush? It's not like there's anywhere to go. You know, lockdown means we're trapped down here on sublevel 2. Indefinitely. Exactly. We don't know how long it will take. We have to be prepared. The other soldier frowned and returned his attention to the panther. Whoever this Smith was, the one they believed attacked their panther friend, he was long dead. The fox had taken his place. Smith hadn't done this. Why isn't he waking up? One of the soldiers rose to his feet and started pacing. You saw what happened. Internal damage takes more time to heal. He'll be fine. He just needs time. I wished that were true. Whatever my mystery woman had put on Chavez's hand had bought him time. Shifting was his best chance, but I doubted anyone could survive an attack by the fox creature. Not if it was anything like what had happened to Kyle, at least, and this looked way too fucking familiar. It ate his liver, I blurted. Both of the soldiers looked at me. Shit. I shouldn't have said anything. It? What are you talking about? Both approached the glass. The creature I'm hunting shredded your friend. I nodded toward the panther. On the floor. The soldier scowled at me, clearly not believing. I saw the attack with my own eyes, the taller of the two said. And I know the wolf shifter who did it. Does he usually eat his friends? The soldier pounded his fists on the glass. What kind of game are you fucking playing? Come on, said the shorter one. Let's get Chavez somewhere more comfortable. Don't let this shithead get to you. I shouldn't have bothered saying a damn thing. I took a seat at the head of the table and leaned my head back. They moved the panther and went on their way, leaving me alone in the quiet once again. Time dragged on with no way to gauge how long I was sitting there. Based on the patterns of people walking around before the lockdown, I assumed it was morning when the black-haired woman had come to visit me. But it was impossible to know for sure. The lights never turned off, buzzing in the ceiling above me all day and night long. My eyes burned, the lids heavy. How long had it been since I had slept? 2, 3 days? Too long. The door seemed sturdy enough. This was as safe a place as any to catch a little rest given the circumstances. And if I didn't sleep, soon I'd make more stupid mistakes. I leaned back in my seat and let my eyes finally fall shut. At first there was only darkness. Footsteps echoed. A dream. I was dreaming. I looked out into the void, waiting for my friend, waiting for Kyle. A sense of dread hung over me, expecting to see him the way I had last bloody-eyed. Been too late. But as the sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, I didn't see him. I didn't see anyone. There was only black. 2 small copper globes lit, a set of stunning eyes. And then I saw her. Straight black hair hung over her shoulders and her hips swayed as she approached. Her features were sharp yet delicate, and light freckles decorated her fair skin. Her red dress matched the sky-high heels that clicked with every step. Her hips were wide, her breasts the perfect handfuls even though her frame was small. She stopped in front of me and climbed onto my lap. Her scent was intoxicating, clean and sweet, filled with desire. I ran my hands up her bare thighs. She was smooth and warm, and when I squeezed her ass she smiled. "Who are you?" I asked. Her lips moved, but there was no sound. She didn't need to answer. I knew who she was. Mine. A click of the door handle and my eyes shot open. It was just a fucking dream. I woke feeling like I hadn't rested at all, and slid my palms over my eyes. The man who entered the room was one of the soldiers that had locked me in. Here. What did the other guy say his name was? Hutchins? Hitchens? Hitchens, I said, surprised by how strained my voice sounded. The bear shifter said nothing and took a seat across the table from me. His intense stare made it seem like he was waiting for me to say something else. I tried to read his expression to figure out what he might want, but he gave nothing away. Was that right? Your name is Hitchens, isn't it? He continued to give me a blank stare, never breaking eye contact. Look, I said, I'm sure those other soldiers told you what I said about the liver. That's why you're here, right? He slowly tilted his head to the side, as if he were listening for something. Hitchens. Right. Name Hitchens. Thank you. I don't know what your game is. The good cop bad cop routine. But this is Hitchens' bad half. A chill ran down my spine and I sniffed the air. When I'd met this guy before, he had the clear scent of a bear shifter. Now nothing. There was something strange about his cheeks too. There were 3 long white hairs on each side. More like whiskers than a beard. I pushed against the floor with my feet, shoving my chair back the hell away. The door opened again, and this time Hitchens' partner stepped in. Denton glared at me and ignored not Hitchens. All right, asshole, you need to start talking and fast. What the hell is going on? Don't move. The fuck? You don't tell me what to do. He rounded the table and grabbed my arm. Come on, Hitch, I'm tired of dealing with this prick. That is not Hitchens. I winced as the wolf shifter's fist smashed into my jaw. I was getting really fucking tired of being hit. Down, boy. He let out a dark chuckle. My jaw stung, and the wolf inside of me was teeming at the surface, ready to fight, ready to shift. But it wasn't this dickhead I needed to worry about. Was the thing imitating his friend? Not Hitchens rose to his feet. Denton finally looked at him. He studied not Hitchens' face and flared his nostrils. Finally he took a step back. Realization taking hold. Shit. Denton reached for his sidearm. He wasn't fast enough. Not Hitchens. Lunged over the table and tackled the wolf shifter to the floor. Denton managed to throw off his attacker and took a few steps back before not Hitchens rose to his feet. Denton drew his gun and fired at not Hitchens, hitting him in the center of the chest. My ears rang. Not Hitchens looked down at his chest. The hole in his flesh and in his clothing closed like nothing had happened. What the fuck? Denton's eyes went wide. Not Hitchens opened his mouth and looked up at the wolf shifter. Fuck the down. There was no emotion in his voice, no variation in his tone, like a damned robot with its circuits scrambled. Denton raced for the door, but not Hitchens pounced and grabbed him around the legs with both arms. The wolf shifter fell forward and smashed his head on the door he had been desperately trying to reach. Not Hitchens pressed Denton's shoulders to the floor and opened its mouth, wider than physically possible, driving its fangs into the wolf shifter's neck. Denton screamed and flailed as the monster ripped into his flesh. Blood sprayed the walls and carpet. I struggled against my chains, knowing I was next, knowing I had to do something. After the beating he'd given me, part of me wanted to leave the shifter to his fate, but no one deserved this. I couldn't help as I was, so I let go of human form and let the wolf inside take control. Fur erupted across my skin, and my bones began to crack. But then a jolt of electricity shot through my body, and the shift stopped. It was my bonds. I'd forgotten they prevented shifting. Fuck. Human form would have to do. I jumped on the creature's back and slid the chain of my cuffs between Not Hitchens and his prey. The creature hissed and writhed as I pulled the chain back, holding its jaw open. Fur ripped over Not Hitchens's body. Its chest expanded and it snapped my bonds in half with its jaw. It dropped to all fours as its face grew wide and its body overtook the room. It was shifting into a fucking bear. Not good odds for me. Not Hitchens roared and slammed open the conference room door, leaving its meal discarded on the floor. The bear ran off and disappeared down the hall. There was no scent to follow, no way to know the layout of the facility, and I'd lost my ability to shift while I was chained. Basically I was fucked. Though not so bad as the wolf shifter by my feet. I kneeled down beside him, unable to hear his pulse either because there was none or because I was still partially deafened from the gunshot. I put 2 fingers to his bloodied throat, feeling for a pulse. Get your fucking hands off of me. Denton smacked my hand away and rolled over onto his back. Believe me now? I asked. He snorted. We thought that whatever was going on was contained on sublevel 1. I can't fucking believe this. Since that thing looks like Hitchens, does that mean he's likely dead? Yeah. I offered him a hand to get up. Is it contagious? He rubbed the back of his neck and ignored my hand. No, not that I've seen. It's one creature, and apparently it changes forms. Denton rose to his feet and swayed. Yeah, I got that part. You can't stay in here. I glanced at the door that had been ripped from its hinges. No shit. I kept my mouth shut. You'll join this floor's personnel in emergency quarters for now, he went on. I'll be watching you, so don't do anything stupid. I could have let you to die, but I didn't, I said. And you still think I'm working with that monster? His mouth flattened into a line. I shook my head. I couldn't get a fucking break. No, he said. I believe your story, but it's my job to be cautious. Understood. Come on. He led me down the hall the opposite way from where the bear had traveled. If he'd take off the anti-shift cuffs from my wrists, I'd chase after. Confined to this floor, even if I didn't know the facility, it was the closest I'd gotten to catching the creature. The 2 of us could end this, I said, lifting my cuffs up to him to unlock. You know the facility. I know the monster. Don't press your luck. Chapter 5. Madison. Like a really slow, ridiculously obnoxious drum, my new neighbor was banging on the wall. Each thud irked me more than the last until I gave up on even trying to read. Something had to be done, and soon. I kept hoping they would just stop on their own. It wasn't like I had never lived beside someone before. In the Constable, everyone lived under one roof. There was no such thing as quiet. Since I'd left, I'd gotten used to being alone, blissfully alone. Maybe I was lucky. I wasn't being held in an unfamiliar room like everyone else. Other scientists had families, mates to go home to, mates they were cut off from returning to. But that wasn't an excuse to be rude. All 30-some of us scientists, and however many soldiers happened to be passing through this floor, were now confined to the emergency quarters and lounge areas for the duration of the lockdown. There was enough space for everyone to have their own small rooms, but apparently not enough for even an ounce of solitude and peace. We'd have limited options, but plenty of food to survive a year. Hopefully it wouldn't come to more than a few days before the issue of the contagion or whatever was happening was dealt with. After a few more bangs, I couldn't take any more. I put down my book and stormed out into the hall. The noise was even louder out here. Whoever had taken residency next door had left the door open. I didn't have a plan. Wasn't sure what I was going to say beyond a reminder that there was a person on the other side of that wall. But I did have to say something. I knocked on the open door to announce myself before stepping over the threshold. And then I saw him. Tate Graves, the conference room prisoner, the giant of a man that I couldn't seem to stay away from, was in the room beside mine. He was stretched out on the bed, wearing the clothes of a tribunal soldier. I'd never thought of the black shirt and camo pants as sexy before, but this man could wear the grabber and I'd be into it. He could grab me anytime. What? He was bouncing a ball off of my wall. A reminder that I was supposed to be angry, not drooling. And then he looked at me. His jaw was freshly shaven, and his black hair was wet. All cleaned up he was. Like a different man. But it was those same sharp olive eyes that pinned me in place just as they had before. I blinked hard. It's you. Hi. He sat up. I didn't catch your name before. Madison. Madison Quinn. You're welcome to come in, Madison Quinn. I loved the way he said my name. Dark and deep. Hot. I did as he said and took a few steps into his room. Stupid. I was supposed to tell him to stop with the pounding so I could return to my book. I didn't need complications in my life. I decided long ago it was best if life was simple, if it was just me. I never had a chance to properly thank you before. He rose to his feet and walked over to me. His scent was clean and masculine, like a freshwater spring nestled at the foot of a mountain. I watched the way he moved, admired the squareness of his shoulders. I never liked big guys. They were brutes. But here I was admiring the way his shirt clung to his chest, the way he made me feel small and feminine by comparison. No, it wasn't supposed to go like this. I straightened my back, taking up as much space as I could. In my experience as a petite woman and also a tiny raven shifter, it was always best to appear bigger when dealing with over-the-top machismo. He'd be a jerk like the rest. They always were the soldier type. Most of all. And it wasn't just the uniform that made me think that Tate was a soldier of some kind. It was the way he moved, the way he carried himself. Tall and square and I expected to rot in that conference room, he said. But you gave me food. Stood up for me when the guards hit me. Who are you, Madison Quinn? Suddenly the room was too small. He was too close. I'm no one. I took a step back. That's not true. Just a scientist, I said. None of the others approached me when I was locked in that room. None of the others went out of their way to help when that soldier was attacked. I didn't want to either. You might not have wanted to, but you helped. He inhaled slowly. And his eyes grew darker. You're special, Madison. I thought he was going to come closer, and that fight or flight reflex was back. This time with the first F running through my head wasn't fight. Wasn't flight either. But he didn't move. He left me space and I didn't flee. To be clear, I didn't do the other F either. Why are you here? My voice was quieter than I'd intended. He looked over my face, his gaze lingering on my lips. I'm hunting a monster. I'd never believed in such things. The word implied innate wrongness. There was biological reason in everything and everyone, even if we didn't understand the reason. Still, when Tate looked at me like that, I was tempted to nod in agreement. I wanted to believe in him, even if it was crazy. I wanted to believe that I'd been wrong about everything, that there was a chance for me to find the same happily ever after that my sisters had. I could have a mate, a family. And that was crazier than believing in monsters. Tate stared into my eyes, waiting for me to say something. I was supposed to be saying something. I mean, why did they let you out of the conference room? I asked. You don't know. He frowned like that was a surprise. I guess given the close quarters the floor was sharing, assuming rumors would travel made sense. Everyone in the constable always knew everyone else's business. I'd always hated that. I shook my head. I'm not much for gossip. The creature is on this level, Tate said. It impersonated one of the soldiers and busted down the door. The fresh clothes and better accommodations make it seem like they trust you. I gestured at the room. Did you do something to make them believe your story? A hint of a smile played on his lips, and just as quickly as it appeared it was gone. He lifted his arms, showing me the broken cuffs on his wrists. The chain between was gone, but the cuffs would still prevent him from shifting. I saved a man's life, but trust only goes so far. He nodded to someone behind me. I turned. Isn't that right, Denton? Across the hall, a soldier was sitting in a chair facing Tate's room. He had his arms crossed and his scowl took over his face. If I wasn't mistaken, he was one of the two who had interrogated Tate yesterday. Isn't he one of the two that locked you in the conference room? Tate nodded. You'd think he'd have something better to do now, like hunting down the monster that tried to eat him, the one stalking through the halls, pretending to be his partner. Denton grumbled. If it appears to be another, how can you be certain it's a single creature? And not a madness caused by a virus or some other? That thing was not Hitchens, Denton said. I nodded, but I never believed anything I didn't test thoroughly in the lab. First, that journey of discovery was why I loved my job so much. Well, this has been informative. I turned for the door before looking back. One more time at Tate. Please don't bang on the wall. With that, I hurried back to my room for a relatively peaceful night of rest. I woke 2 minutes before my alarm was set to go off. There was definitely more noise than usual at this hour, voices and movement in the hall. But given the circumstances, it was surprisingly reassuring. No one sounded in distress. So even though there was a murderous creature on the loose, everything was weirdly mundane. Except we wouldn't be returning to our labs. We'd all be stuck in quarters until the situation was dealt with. Finding the truth would be my mission, whether I was in my lab or in my quarters. I dressed and headed out into the hall. Dr. Quinn. The voice was unfamiliar, but I turned. There was a soldier jogging down the hall toward me. Here. He held out his hand, and I accepted the ring he held. It was the force ring I'd used on the panther. No longer needing the ring meant one of two things. Either the panther shifter had completely healed, or he died during the night. I was afraid to ask, but I offered a small smile and did it anyway. How is he? Alive, thanks to you. I let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I looked over the soldier's face, trying to remember. You're not the panther, right? He laughed. No, ma'am. I wasn't used to being called ma'am. Felt weird. Chavez isn't awake yet, he continued. But he's stable. If he's not conscious, why did you remove the device? Boss thought it was for the best. Chavez shifted back to human form after we took the ring off. We think there might be something wrong inside, but he's stable enough that he should be okay until the lockdown is over. I'm glad to hear that. I hoped he was right. There was no way to know how long the lockdown would go on for. I slipped the ring into my pocket. I'd return it to its rightful place as soon as I was able. Thanks for doing what you did. He clasped my shoulder, then turned and headed for the lounge. I waited a moment before following. The lounge was much busier than usual, packed with tables and chairs, overstuffed with people. If I didn't have a job to do, I'd have just gone back to my room. I scanned the crowd and found the scientist I was looking for. Charlotte from zoology was sitting with a group of others I didn't recognize. When I reached the table, they all stopped talking and looked up at me like I was a three-headed unicorn. Madison, right? Charlotte gave me a puzzled look. Yes. I was hoping you could help me with identifying the creature that has infiltrated the facility, I said. She raised her eyebrows, impressed. You want to be productive and get us the hell home? Count me in. It's not like there's anything better to do while we're all trapped here. I listed all of the information I'd gathered up to this point. The other scientists listened with interest, and a few chimed in with questions. One mentioned my initial thought of a contagion. By the time I finished going over what I knew, I had an entire team of volunteers promising to compile possibilities in their respective fields: magical devices, supernatural creatures, and biological agents. If anyone could figure this thing out, and a plan to stop it, it was the scientists of Sublevel 2. When there was a lull in conversation, I grabbed one of the last muffins and an orange, then retreated from the commotion. The last thing I needed was someone to ask me to sit down to discuss personal matters, or worse, to run into Tate. My best thinking was done when I wasn't flustered. Thank you very much. I ate my food and recorded everything I could think of in the notebook I kept under my pillow, including a list of objects that could offer the ability to alter appearance. All of them were currently locked in the storage floor, but it was possible someone had found a new relic similar to one I'd researched. It was possible, with the relic removed from the intruder's person, that he or she would revert back to their natural form with no memory of anything that had happened. As was the case with most relics, stranger things had happened. My door opened. I turned around, wondering who would be so brash as not to knock. It was Charlotte. Hey, I said. Did you guys already figure this thing out? Seemed unlikely without more information, but why else would she be here? Hey. Her voice sounded strange, flat and robotic. Is everything okay? I rose from my desk. You seem is okay, bad, half Hitchens. Something was very wrong with her. Maybe it really was a virus, and now Charlotte had been infected. More than the fact that she seemed confused, her eyes were dull and different somehow. Her tiger shifter scent seemed to be completely gone. A few words spoken and I could shift. If she was like the others, if she attacked, I'd fly into the rafters. But that wouldn't stop her from hurting others. If you aren't feeling well, it would be for the best to lie down, I said. For best. I smiled and nodded, the magic words that would allow me to shift on the tip of my tongue. The scent of fresh mountain air greeted me a moment before Tate stepped into the doorway behind Charlotte. His eyes went wide and he dove at her. Wait, I said. Don't hurt her. Tate tackled Charlotte to the ground. There had to be some explanation. He couldn't be doing this. I'd liked him. I trusted him. But maybe I was wrong. And he belonged in a cell. Help, I yelled. We need help. Denton ran in and looked at the two fighting on the ground. What the fuck is going on, Graves? Tate wrestled to hold Charlotte still, though she wasn't making it easy on him. The tail, he said through gritted teeth. And then I saw it. Sticking out between them was a tail attached to Charlotte. In her human form. And it wasn't even the tail of a tiger. It was the tail of fox. And now I was even more confused than before. What's going on? I asked. Denton threw Tate a key. He caught it, but not without giving Charlotte the opportunity she needed to free herself. Her skin rippled with orange and black fur and she shifted into a tiger, but with strangely pointed ears. She charged past me, tore the air vent grate open with her claws and dove inside. Tate freed his wrists from the cuffs and raced after Charlotte. I looked to Denton for answers. That's not your lab buddy. It's the monster. Nothing made any sense. Aren't you going after her? I asked. He shook his head. I can't. Have to stay here and protect the scientists. Lockdown protocol. Yeah, sure, of course. I looked at the vent, listened to the noise of Tate chasing after the creature who looked like Charlotte. I couldn't let him do it alone. We all had our jobs to do, and mine was here. I knew I shouldn't go. But it wasn't me that was special, it was him. And I wouldn't let Tate die if I could help it. I whispered the words of my people, the magic of my constable. Igni, in, Kalo, no summus noctis don ex summus sinus. Into the fire, into the sky. We are the night until we are ash. I transformed into my raven and against my better judgment flew through the broken grate. Chapter 6. Tate. The concrete passage wasn't too tight, more like a maintenance tunnel than an air duct. Fortunately for me, I was able to fit in human form, crawling on hands and knees. I struggled to maintain control over the wolf inside of me. Fury boiled just beneath the surface, the thirst for revenge. I would kill the fox creature, no question. But shifting too soon could leave me at a disadvantage when I still might need my human hands. This was unfamiliar terrain, no way to know what was coming. But at least that went for the both of us. The creature didn't know what to expect any more than I did. Up ahead was a grate, twisted and discarded. A little farther, a hole. I looked down and listened. Darkness. Silence. There was no sign of the creature, but it was just as likely to be waiting for me at the bottom of this fall as it was to be somewhere else on the floor below. I had to go down, but I couldn't go unprepared. Stripping my clothes off wasn't easy in such a tight space. I set everything by the edge of the hole and let my wolf free. My bones cracked and restructured, and my senses heightened with the transition. When the shift was over, I could almost stand in the space. I nudged my belongings down to whatever waited for me below, and I took the plunge. Ready to defend myself, I landed on my paws. I took in my surroundings, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. It was a long room with rows of huge cylinders 10 feet tall. With no scent to follow, I'd have to rely entirely on my other senses. I listened and watched for movement. It was possible the creature had already left the area, but it was also possible it was here, carrying my clothing in my mouth. I stalked slowly, carefully out to explore. I could drop them quickly if I needed to. Better not to have to come back for them later. There was a switch on the wall. I jumped up and nudged it with my nose, flicking it down and back up again. The lights on this entire floor seemed to be out. As I stepped close to the first pillar, it lit up, revealing a tank of glowing green water. Inside was some kind of animal. It was humanoid in shape, with skin covered in spines and gills on its neck. Its eyes were closed, and it didn't seem to be moving at all. What the hell was this place? I took a few steps more and the next pillar lit up. Inside was a ghostly pale woman with long black hair and a black dress. Her mouth was open and filled with dagger-like teeth. Her hands were similar, with long needles where fingers should have been. Creep the fuck out, I stepped back. Was this what the fox monster had come here for? I'd assumed it had been drawn to all the shifters after the forest, hunting its next meal. What if it had come from here? Or what if it was looking for one of its kind? Movement caught my eye, a small shape above in the rafters. Had the creature changed forms again? I set down my clothes and watched. The small shape weaved between the pillars and landed on the top of the nearest. A bird. Its black feathers shone an unearthly green in the glow of the tube light. The copper eyes assessed me. Not its eyes, her eyes. Madison. It had to be. I hadn't bothered to ask what kind of shifter she was, and thinking back, her scent had given nothing away. She shouldn't have followed me. I shifted back to human form and threw my clothes on. You should have stayed. Stairs. Don't be stupid. Go back. The raven puffed out her chest and shook her head. Stubborn, frustrating. It's not safe. My voice was half growl. Go. The raven spread her wings and lifted her head. Good, she was leaving. That was for the best. Sure, I could use a guide, but being down here meant she'd get herself killed. I wasn't prepared to let that happen on my watch. Denton would have been my first choice, experienced, disposable. I couldn't waste any more time. I had to find the creature. I kept going the way I had started, toward the other end of the never-ending room. Charging after Charlotte on your own is what's not safe. I spun around, only to find Madison behind me. Her scent was sweet like citrus, subtle and pleasant. How the hell did you get your clothes down? Here. Her cheeks turned pink and fuck, it was hot. Mine. Ravens have a different kind of shift. She lifted her chin as she had done. As a bird. Not that it's your business. You shift with your clothes? She crossed her arms across her chest and didn't reply. It's a nice trick, I said. It's not a trick. She flattened her lips into a line. Look, I know you think you're this army of one, but that's about right. I crossed my arms too, a little amused and a little annoyed by the way she was challenging me. I didn't have time for this. Follow if you want, but I have a monster to catch. And I'd prefer if you didn't get yourself killed. Me get myself killed? She sucked in a sharp breath. I came to help. You. I turned and started walking. The wolf part of me was clawing in the back of my head, trying to paint this as something it wasn't, trying to tell me that I had to protect her. A wolf always protects his mate. But I wasn't the mating kind. She didn't say anything else, but I could feel her presence behind me. The end of the long room was a laboratory with all kinds of science equipment. Grabbed a flashlight, but it was the scalpels and saws that had my attention. What the hell do you people do here? Wow. She sounded upset, like I'd offended her. There are bodies in those tubes. I thought the tribunal was supposed to be about keeping peace and the human world from learning about us. But this looks like some kind of mad scientist's lair, like playing God. You can't be serious. I turned to look at her. She sighed. First off, I identify magical artifacts on sublevel 2. I have never been to this floor, nor am I privy to the details of their research. You saw what's in those tubes. Yes, she said. But there's no reason to believe anything cruel or unusual has been done to the bodies within. They look pretty fucking unusual to me. There's a lot more to the supernatural world than the shifters that you've encountered. Like a raven who takes her clothes with her? Her whole face turned red, and I felt a little bad about making her so upset. But it would be better for both of us if she went back through the vent. My wolf was going crazy with Madison around. I couldn't afford distraction. It's magic, she said. Each constable of ravens has their own spell. It only works on the ravens of the individual constable. So it's not a shift at all? She shrugged. Semantics. I started walking once again, and didn't look back when I spoke. Why did you join the tribunal? I like exploring, learning everything there is to know. In my lab I'm first to discover what newly found magical objects do. That did sound interesting. I wouldn't be caught deadlocked underground in an office if I could help it, but I could see the appeal. What about you? She asked. When you're not hunting monsters, do you roam the countryside insulting people? I looked at her and she looked both mortified and amused, her hands over her mouth. Maybe she hadn't meant to say that out loud. I was glad she did. More or less. I was kidding, she said. I'm not. She shook her head and kept walking. Instead of turning back and forth, it was smarter just to let her walk with me, so I did. I slowed and let her slip in beside me. Maybe it was a mistake because the closeness made my wolf even more insistent. She was a beautiful mystery, and it was difficult not to stare. I needed to breathe her in, to throw her against the wall and claim her as my mate. Mine. I'm not good with people, I said. She smiled. You're shocked and surprised, right? I asked. Oh yes. Of course. It was just me and my mom growing up, I said. It wasn't exactly an apology for being an asshole to her, but I wanted her to understand. It shouldn't have mattered to me what she thought, but it did. We never belonged to a pack. When I was 16, she decided to settle down, but the pack life wasn't a good fit for me. So I've been alone ever since. So the friend that you're trying to avenge? First friend in a long time. We were traveling together, a pack of 2 for a while. We were staying in a cabin he built, a few hours' run from here, when he was attacked. I'm sorry. Don't be. That's just how life is. She frowned and looked down. Tell her you're sorry for being a dick. Tell her. There was a buzzing sound, and Madison reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She looked at the screen and then at me. Her eyes were wide. It's Charlotte. That was the name she's used for the monster before. Did that mean the fox creature copied the appearance of people it didn't first kill? Madison answered the phone. Charlotte. I listened for the strange broken speech of the monster. Could it use a phone? So, why? Madison, are you okay? Yes. Are you? I'm fine, the woman on the line said in a completely normal voice. Based on the behavior of the creature and the most recent incident, we believe we've identified its species. Of course, without actual lab testing of any kind or even the opportunity to observe the subject, we can only present a hypothesis. Spit it out already. Of course, Madison said. We believe the creature to be a kumiho, a species thought to be mythical. Before now, kumihos can mimic the appearance of any living being it makes contact with, though the approximations are never entirely accurate. Like you walking around with a foxtail, Madison said. Exactly. There is always a tail with one physical attribute of the fox form. That is its natural state. Kumihos require livers to survive, and are said to spend their lives searching for some way to truly become human. Human? Interesting, Madison said. Thank you, Charlotte. She hung up the phone and we kept on our way. If this thing was trying to become human, what made it think this was a good place to do that? I looked at Madison, at her pink lips and the determination set in her eyes. What was going on in that beautiful brain of hers? And how the fuck was I supposed to focus on anything but her? Chapter 7. Madison. Why was I doing this? Why was I following him? Logic dictated the best course of action was to remain in my quarters, or at least in a different room on sublevel 2, one that was less likely to be invaded by a flesh-eating mythical creature. The vent opening was right beside my bed, but I wasn't following lockdown protocol or logic. I was following Tate Graves, a gruff, grumpy wolf shifter who didn't seem to want my help. Yet here I was. Why? His arms were so big, I wondered what it would feel like to touch them, to be held by them. His jaw was so strong it could crush steel. Okay, maybe not that, but all the features I'd associated with the soldiers here, all the things I hadn't liked about them, I liked them on Tate. I found it difficult not to look at him. We both should have had our undivided attention on our surroundings, watching and listening for the kumiho. But the longer we walked together, I found myself becoming more and more distracted. I looked to one of the tubes, but that didn't help anything. Fingers by the glass seemed to move, a trick of light, I was sure. I wonder what happened to the power, I said. It would be a lot less creepy with the lights on. Tate remained silent. He went from friendly smiles to cold replies and then back again. Now he was throwing in the silent treatment. I couldn't tell if he enjoyed my company or hated me. The possibilities seemed equally likely. I hope everyone is safe in their quarters. Not that mine turned out to be all that safe. Why was I talking so much? I needed to stop. How long have you been hunting the kumiho? Apparently I couldn't stop talking. I glanced up at Tate's face, at the hard lines of his profile, the details hidden in shadow, before quickly shifting my attention back out to the darkness between rows of tubes. A week or so. How do you think the Kumiho found the facility? Tate glanced down at me. You don't have a theory? Well, I did have a guess, but no evidence. Lots of warm bodies to feed on, probably. Tate turned the flashlight, flicking over more tubes. At least these ones were empty. There aren't that many of us here, given the size of the facility, I said. If it were about population, I imagine the Kumiho would have been drawn to a city. So you tell me, he said. Why is it here? If in fact we are dealing with a Kumiho, and its objective is to become human, my guess is that there is something here that it believes will help it meet that goal. Is that even possible? Anything is possible. He gave me a look that suggested he didn't believe me. I touched his wrist and he stopped walking, his attention entirely on me. Pulled my hand away, still feeling the warmth of his skin on my fingertips. You're a man who transforms into a wolf, hunting a creature that can mimic the likeness of other living, breathing beings. What makes this beyond the realm of possibility? He stared at my mouth, then turned and started walking again. First he didn't say anything, then he finally answered. Nothing. It wasn't a lie, but there was something else he was holding back. He had a reason and he didn't want to tell me. Suddenly, knowing what he was keeping from me seemed the most important thing in the world. Do you not believe it's a Kumiho? I asked. He shrugged, but his whole posture was stiff. I was on to something. During each of your encounters with the creature, did you notice fox-like attributes? I don't know. His words were half grunt. I was really on to something. Excitement swirled in my stomach, that feeling when I knew I was about to uncover the nature of an artifact I'd spent months studying. It could be anything, I said. A tail, Kennedy-esque eyes, pointed ears, whiskers even. Maybe isn't a real answer. I'd accept that you weren't sure if it wasn't so obvious you were holding something back. What is it you don't want to tell? So fast I didn't see it coming, Tate pulled me into his arms. His lips crashed over mine and my whole body came to life, every nerve, every inch of my skin. It was like I'd spent my life in a foggy dream until now, like I'd been waiting for his lips to wake me up. His kiss was hard and unexpected, just like him. And as quickly as it had happened, it was over. And I was left speechless. Tate ran his fingers through his hair, something dark and unrecognizable in his gaze. And then he started walking like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just shattered my entire world with a single kiss. I felt something I'd never felt before. Out of control. I needed more of him. I hurried to keep up. Tate! I touched his shoulder. It was a mistake. He didn't turn. He didn't look at me. I'm sorry. And once again my world was shattered and kicked and thrown upside down. How could one person, a man I hardly knew, a man who was nothing like me, nothing like what I wanted, how could he have so much power of my emotions? I sucked in a deep breath and tried to let go. It was me who'd made the mistake of following him down here. I whispered the words that would allow me to shift. Igni, Incalo, no sumus, noctis don ex sumus sinus. Fight or flight, I choose flight every time. Chapter 8. Tate. Wings spread wide, Madison rose up to the ceiling, flying back the way we had come. It's what I'd wanted. And it hurt like hell. I turned around and followed, first walking, then running to keep up. My inner wolf fought for control, fought to hold on to her, keep her close. One taste wasn't enough. Nothing short of mating would be. But that wasn't the best thing for her. I was trying to keep her safe. I'd follow until I knew she reached the vent unharmed. Then I'd return to my hunt. It was what I needed to do. She was too fast and I couldn't keep up. The distance between us grew. As a wolf I could run faster, all it would take was a shift. No. I needed the flashlight. Needed my hands to open doors. I needed to let her go. I stopped running. I stopped walking and I lost sight of Madison in the darkness. She was gone, leaving a hole in my chest. It was for the best. I'd only get her killed. There was a clicking sound like heels on cement. I turned, but it was too late. Stabbing pain shot through my neck and human-like fingers dug into my shoulders. I growled and fought to pull the Kumiho from my back. It was big, still in the shape of a human woman. I bashed into it with the butt of my flashlight, to no avail. With every movement, the creature's hold on me seemed to grow stronger. Shifting was my only shot. As my bones cracked, the kumiho's jaw remained clamped around my neck. Fur rippled all over my body. I twisted, sinking my fangs into the fake woman's thigh. Didn't even flinch. The taste of copper filled my mouth, but it was the scent of citrus that set my heart racing. Behind not Charlotte, Madison appeared. Not the raven, but the woman. No. Run. Fly away. She jumped on the kumiho's back, wrestling with its hand. The pressure in my neck lessened, causing the sharp pain to spread. The creature transformed, clothing along with flesh. Its dog-like eyes went wide. As it backed away, lab coat and human skin alike became fur, and its face sharpened to the pointed muzzle of a fox. It was much wispier than a natural fox or even a fox shifter. It didn't have just one white-tipped tail, but 9. And just as it appeared, it disappeared into the darkness. I shifted back to human form and grabbed Madison's shoulders. What did you do? It took everything I had not to pull her into my chest. Saved your life. I used the force ring, the one that forces a shifter to shift. Interesting that it works on the kumiho. Perhaps her genes aren't so different from ours. Are you okay? She looked me over, a beautiful blush crossing her cheeks as she took in my nakedness. Her bright copper eyes were moons in an otherwise endless night, drawing me in. Fuck. I couldn't do this. I let her go and took a step away. No, I was not. Okay, which had nothing to do with my injuries. The flesh would heal. And I was losing whatever chance I had to follow the kumiho. You shouldn't have come back, I said. You're welcome. You're safer upstairs. She nodded. Sure, but you're safer with me here. What makes you my keeper? Why do you think you get to tell me what to do? Between the kiss and then pushing me away. And now, Madison. I've never been so confused, she said. Me either. She waited for me to respond, but I couldn't. Was I emotionally stunted? Sure. Maybe. Articulate with my feelings? Hell no. I didn't want feelings. I wanted numbness, hatred, to only have to deal with the drive of revenge. This was harder. Whatever this was, I didn't like it. I had a mission. That was all that was supposed to matter. She sighed and started walking, heading back toward the vent. I grabbed my clothes and quickly dressed. I couldn't let her go. I couldn't let her stay. I'd only felt so wounded once in my life, when I'd left my mother's side and headed out on my own. I had to make the same choice now that I had then, keep moving forward. Needed to stop the kumiho before it hurt anyone else. And knowing that was the choice I had to make broke my fucking heart. Madison was walking away. I was letting her, pushing her. Mine. I was protecting everyone in this facility. Most of all, I was protecting her. Movement caught my eye high up by the ceiling. There was a flash of red fur snaking through the metal. One of the tanks crashed, then another. I didn't know how the kumiho was doing it, but it was making a hell of a mess, and fast. The kumiho jumped to the empty tank closest to Madison. It felt like slow motion, me trying to run forward, Madison turning toward the falling tank, the heavy metal and glass crashing down on top of her. Anger boiled through my veins as I watched the fox hop away from Madison. She wasn't moving. Madison wasn't moving. Shattered glass was everywhere, green liquid washing over the floor. I ran forward, ready to shift, ready to tear the kumiho to shreds. This was my chance. It was right there, 10 feet away. Sabotaging one of the tanks, one row over. Couldn't change forms, not with Madison's ring stuck to its leg. It crept closer to her, then lifted its head and met my gaze. Frozen, it stared until I started to run. The furious growl that filled the room was mine, and the sound of it seemed to wake the kumiho. Turned and started to run across the top of the tanks. All I had to do was shift and I could end this. Madison. I reached the fallen tank and lifted the metal and glass casing off of her. She was breathing, but her eyes were closed. Madison. Madison, wake up. I touched her cheek. It was cold and wet, and she didn't respond. Madison, please. She was mine to protect, my mate. Nothing else mattered. I lifted her into my arms and held her close. She was breathing, at least she was breathing. We couldn't stay here. I needed a place for her to rest, a safe place where she could heal. The closest and only place I could think of was the small room with the test tubes. I carried her quickly, careful of my footing, watching and listening for signs of the kumiho. If it wasn't for me, none of this would have happened. If Madison hadn't used the ring to save me, I could have used it on her now. The ring could force her Body to raven form, it could help her heal. Could save her life. We reached the lab and I pulled the door shut behind us. There were stools and metal tabletops, but no soft surfaces for Madison to rest. I set her down gently on one of the tabletops and rifled through drawers and cabinets for medical supplies. There were a few bandages in one of the drawers and a blanket in one of the cabinets. Madison couldn't stay on the table. If she rolled, she could fall off. I laid the blanket down by the wall and carried her over. Content that she was taken care of for the moment. I dragged the supply cabinet toward the door. The metal scraping on the cement floor made a loud, terrible sound. I looked to Madison. She was still, no response to the sound. My gut clenched. I sucked in a deep breath and continued my task at hand, one thing at a time. I pushed the cabinet against the door, barricading it shut. The kumiho might not have hands, but it had busted through the vent in Madison's room. I'd felt firsthand how strong it was, and there was no reason to take any chances. Content that the monster couldn't break in, I returned to Madison's side. Removed her lab coat as gently as possible, and checked her as best as I could. For wounds, I lifted her shirt only enough to check for injury on her stomach and ribs. Still, it felt like an invasion of privacy. I'd imagined the first time I'd see beneath her clothes she'd be conscious and willing. We could still have that. She'd be okay. She had to be. There was fresh bruising over her stomach and ribs, but not enough to suggest serious internal bleeding. I put down her shirt and let out a sigh of relief. I looked over her face. She looked so peaceful with her eyes closed. There was a small cut on her cheek. I used one of the bandages to treat the wound. Checked her head and found a slice across her scalp. There was so little I could do for her, and I fucking hated it. For the first time in my life, I realized I had something to lose, someone whose life mattered more to me than my own. And I'd almost lost her. I'd never make that mistake again. Outside the room there was banging and crashing, the splash of liquid on hard surfaces. The kumiho was still out there taunting me. It was destroying the tanks, baiting me to come out. Maybe I could have gotten the ring back, but going out there meant leaving Madison alone. And I wasn't ever going to do that again. She was my mate, and I had to keep her safe.